This is Auteur Detour, wherein three film lovers travel through the filmographies of cinema's most important directors in hopes of finding a greater understanding on the other side.
Hello and welcome back to Auteur Detour. My name is Chris Palazza, and with me, as always, is Ian Hinckley.
Hi.
Hello.
Oh.
Rude.
And his clone, Travis White.
Also here. Hi.
All right, and today, this episode, we're looking at Dunkirk. Director Christopher Nolan's 10th feature film, Dunkirk, is a historical war film depicting the evacuation of 300,000 Allied soldiers from the French beaches of Dunkirk after being pushed all the way to the sea by German forces in World War II. The film layers in three interrelated narratives told from the perspective of soldiers on land, sea, and air. Dunkirk is Nolan's unique contribution to the war film genre, as it's told entirely from the position of the British soldiers, so much so that we never see a single enemy face. While Dunkirk marked a substantial military defeat for the British, the successful evacuation represented a resounding moral victory and a significant turning point in the war. So too, the film represents yet another turning point in an eclectic director's diverse and historic career, dare I say? So Dunkirk, guys, what do you guys think?
I don't know.
What don't you know? Tell it, but what don't you know? What do you mean by I don't know?
I have a hard time with so much in this whole ass series because it's like when I can sit back and just watch it as a spectacle and as like a, I don't know. It's an incredible achievement and it's a beautiful work of art. But I have a hard time with the politics of it, and I have a hard time with just, some of the Nolan stuff in it. Like, I don't know. What do you think, Travis?
Chick flick. Like, just typical. No. Before I tell you guys, can I go find my headphones? I just realized I'm not wearing headphones, so the audio is going to be bad. Yeah.
So when you say you don't agree with the politics of it, Ian, can you say a little bit more?
Yeah, let's wait for Travis for that, though, because I know he's going to have stuff to talk about.
No, he never has anything good to say. Let's just keep it rolling. Time is money here.
Time is, it's only money in one temporal
pincher movement at a time.
Reality. In one of the temporalities of this movie, time is money.
I didn't say temporal pincer movement in our last two episodes, unfortunately. I've been trying to interweave that.
Well, we can go backwards and make that happen.
Good point. Reverse bullet time or whatever it is.
Yeah. No, I don't know. I mean, I could kind of talk about the politics of it, but it's more that was like the first time I watched it. I had a really hard time with that of it. I don't know. Especially because when it came out, it felt so, I don't know. It was like very patriotic, at a time when like it was kind of saying like, no, we all just have to buckle in and do this thing together and that kind of thing. And I was like, no, dissent. Like we don't get behind the government right now. Like I was like very anti when this movie came out, and felt like a weird statement to be making a movie like this, which obviously is British and it's a different kind of thing, but England is having their own. They were having their own moment with that when this came out too, with Brexit and all that shit. And I'm just like, I don't know. We'll get more into the politics because I know Travis will have probably stuff to say about that too. But Travis, tell me what you thought about the movie.
I liked it a lot. It totally dispenses with all the heavy exposition of all of Christopher Nolan's other films. For me, that was like the big shock because, we didn't really talk about the fact that Christopher Nolan had gone from the hottest like indie director to like he reached a kind of like critical and popular peak with Dark Knight that he couldn't keep going up with, right? There had to be some sort of popular break, either he becomes like a treasured like Steven Spielberg or Martin Scorsese or something like that, or people, kind of turn on him, like in the story of his career, right? The mythology of him as a director. And what happened was, and Ian, I wonder if your like Nolan takes that you have, like about how annoying he is and stuff like that. I mean, a lot of that stuff. Sometimes people would point it out before Dark Knight, but it really became kind of popular opinion post Dark Knight that this is a guy, like especially with when Inception came out, and it was kind of like it didn't like it made a ton of money, and a lot of people loved it, and a lot of people were like, this did not capture my imagination. And he, at that point, no movie he made had that same kind of like universal. It wasn't beloved in the same way. Critics, started to have issues with him, but mostly it was like people just being like, this sucks. This is like not interesting. Whatever. The Dark Knight Rises, a lot of people didn't like it. It didn't like meet people's expectations.
Yeah, but I don't think that's. I
and
mean,
and a lot of what and a lot of what he like so a lot and a lot of what people were complaining about was the exposition. People were like, this is like awkward the way you're kind of inserting it into the story. Elliot Page's character only exists to just say what's going on, like rattle off like lore. And so and he hadn't really seemed to address any of those criticisms like in his filmmaking. He had not like changed anything he was doing. He just was kept going for it in the same kind of direction. With this movie, he seems to be like, I can do a movie without exposition.
and
Watch
it'll
me.
be less
Like there's
than 2
almost
hours
no
long.
exposition. There's less exposition in this movie. There's less context in this movie than like almost any other movie you could go and see at any theater. Not just for him, but for any kind of film. And it is, and people also criticize his action filmmaking bona fides. People were saying that, it was slow and clunky. You know what I mean? Like, this is just bad filmmaking. And he's like, and I feel like with this one, he was kind of like, really? Like, he sort of like took that criticism and did something with it. I don't know how conscious it was of his, but it seemed like those sentiments were getting louder and louder. And this movie kind of answers all of them with a movie that works with no context, a movie that works like as just like a series of action set pieces and incredible tension, incredible suspense, and it's powerfully done and incredibly well made. Seeing it this time for the second time, on my home TV, did not compare to seeing it in the theater in IMAX. And so I really feel like this movie works more like an experience, and it is like a beautiful work of art. There are beautiful shots and stuff in it, but I love the lore of Christopher Nolan movies. I love how many like ideas and weird kind of like story concepts he crams into every movie, and I
that's
miss
kind of
that
why
with
I
this one.
mentioned in my intro that it represents sort of a turning point for that you nailed it, and it's very different feeling from the average because it's very bare bones in terms of the story. It's direct. There's no twist. There's no unusual creative writing gimmick that he implements or something that's unusual that's like thrown at us. We're basically watching this what feels like kind of a personal story unfold about an event, not about people at all. And that to me is in a way it's one consistent with Nolan because he never really lets us in with his characters. There's always a little bit of a distance between us and any character. There's always some kind of secret they're holding from us or something that's being withheld. But at the same time, there's all these characters that frankly look kind of similar. They're all male. They're all, all in the same uniform, some of whom are entirely masked up being like the aviators. You can't even see that it's Tom Hardy for the most part, for the majority of the movie, And so there's that like serious distance between us and all of these characters because we have no idea who they are, what their backstory is. And that also makes sense though too, right? Like you're not going to have these guys on the beach like, hey, my name's Fred. How are you? Oh, nice to meet you. I'm Marcus. Boom. Oh, there's bombs going off over the mist,
I was going to say most movies would
like
do. Most movies do that,
Most
though. Yeah,
movies do that, but
Right.
I do really appreciate.
I got a girl back home.
Yeah,
Right.
exactly.
And then,
Right, exactly.
Yeah.
So
But, I mean, my favorite thing about this movie is also what you're talking about is the lack of exposition in a weird way, even though it is like not what makes it a Nolan movie. Obviously, like it's such a stark contrast in that. But I do love that he's going for just, like, he said it himself, like, all he cared about was, are these people going to get off at this, whatever, beach? And, like, every single thing in the story was about servicing that idea of just, like, these people need to get off, how are we going to get them off, kind of thing.
Maybe he wanted to do this, maybe he needed to do a movie like this, but to me, it, as much as I admire it, it also seems like a concession.
Yeah.
So it, you know what I mean? Like, and he's such an artist who kind of was going by his own kind of rules, and in doing so, kind of like changed the way, like, so much of the film industry.
But he did
like,
write this
approached
years
action
before.
movies,
I think
and
it
so-
wasn't like a complete that. I mean, I think maybe the way he made it was, but it was something that he'd had in his back pocket. Like, this idea of the Dunkirk story was something that he'd wanted to tell for a long time. And, I mean, I agree. Like, it's undeniable that some of his choices in this movie, whether it's like being, 140 minutes or whatever it is. I mean, sorry, an hour and 40 minutes, zero exposition. Like, these are things that, like, are so obvious choices for Christopher Nolan to make. And I think that, like, that probably wasn't in the idea, when he was writing it. But it isn't, like, a complete reaction. I think that there is, like, a lot of stuff in this that, is involved in what he always wants to tell. And it is, like, a story that he wants to tell about, like, overcoming and, like, delivering yourself. Like, it's got a lot of his themes in it still. It's very different, obviously.
And what's
I don't know. I think
Another way it's different. In 3 Batman movies, we never saw him have to go to the bathroom.
I love that.
This one, almost immediately, a guy is like, I
I
gotta go
do
to the bathroom
love
on
that,
this
though.
beach.
I mean, that pulled me right in the theater, and I loved it even more this time of just, like, how to create tension.
I was like,
a guy who needs to
I know.
shit and cannot go anywhere, and the whole rest of the movie is just holding in shit. It's so fucking hard to imagine. And that's a lot. I mean, I loved a lot about this movie, and like I said, one of my favorite things about it was that it's got the politics of Saving Private Ryan, but the, like, tonal poem of Thin Red Line, And I loved the, I hate the politics part of it, but I loved that it was just like, we don't know who these characters are. The fact that he hides Tom Hardy, the most beautiful actor working today, and, like, he loves to just hide him and only let him give eye performances, even though he has, like, the prettiest mouth.
whoa?
put him in a mask. Like, don't let us hear what he's saying.
Yeah.
Like,
Oh, but that's what I was going to say, too.
It's almost
in
impossible
terms
to
of,
hear what he's saying.
that's a Nolan thing, trying to prove a point that, like, we've talked about it, that, like, in life, if you were in this scenario, you wouldn't know what the fuck people were saying. Like, it'd be hard to hear people. This is the only time that it lined up for me where I was like, oh, he figured out how to make that work. Like, every other time I'm like, but what did he say? Like, I kind of need to know, This time I was just like, oh yeah, I can't hear what anybody's saying, and, like, I feel like I'm in it. Like, I get it. Like, it doesn't
Right.
matter what they're saying.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know if you would agree with me, but this is probably the worst sound/score of any Christopher Nolan movie. There's just so much just going on that's just, why did you do that? What's that noise in the background? Why are you doing this, Hans Zimmer? I had to replay the end of The Dark Knight just because, recently. I fucking love that ending so much. And it's just like the swelling of the beats and stuff. But this movie has so many weird, unusual sounds in it that it really, I don't know, took me out of it in a way.
It's like a horror movie soundtrack.
Yeah, totally.
It's it's like Goblin, from Suspiria. It's I loved the soundtrack, or the score, but it's not really like any other Christopher Nolan score, and it's not like, certainly not like any other war movie score. Like, it doesn't really come close to any kind of, like, traditional kind of movie score until, like, the very, 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 very end, like when they're back to England.
Right.
Mm-hmm.
But any other sequence is just like it's very upsetting. It's like almost like experimental.
I like the experimental nature of
I
that,
liked
but
it, but-
I don't. I think he was going for like an anxiety-inducing kind of sound, which kind of happened, but for me it was almost more obnoxious than it was anxiety-inducing. The visuals are definitely there. Like you feel at any minute these guys are gonna get a bomb dropped on them. You know, it's there. But
Chris, you didn't mention? Do you like this movie? Did you like it this time?
okay. This is a true mixed bag in the sense that it's got everything that I don't like about a Christopher Nolan movie sort of in it, and so much unforgettable imagery that some of the most unforgettable imagery maybe in any Nolan movie for me, like that shot of as soon as the propeller stops working in Tom Hardy's Spitfire, it's just gliding through the air with it's almost like magic, you know. Like when I first saw it, I'm like, is that how that works? I thought like an engine goes off and it's just going to start like nose diving, you know what I'm saying? But no, I mean, momentum and all that, aerodynamic. The way it lands on the beach is you see him like hand cranking the landing gear. Anything shot from the sky is just one of those, you know, beautiful. I want to just live there. You know, he really immerses you in the
especially. It was just.
It's really beautifully shot. I don't.
The last shot of it, there's this like close up of the plane, and it's like surreal because it's just like
Absolutely.
It's like,
you know, I have something to say about
really
that
cool.
shot, but I want to keep hearing Chris's thing.
But
keep
no,
going.
it's on the lower end of my Christopher Nolan filmography. Okay. But again,
Did you see it in the theater?
No, I saw it. Maybe 2 years after it came out, so not right away, admittedly. And now I really wish I had seen it in the theater, because this, I think, like you said, Travis, it definitely begs for like an IMAX screening. It's all shot on film. It's all just, it looks amazing, you know. But I think what I don't like about it is just a lot of the things that I don't tend to care for about a Nolan movie is just the overly bro-y nature. Not bro, but like it's total masculine energy.
Just
you know, and like almost like, are you choosing to omit people of color from this? Like, if any time there was an opportunity to put people of color in a movie, god damn it, this is the one. You know, like as I recall, there's so many Indians in the British Royal Navy at this time, right? How are there not one like brown person in this entire movie? It's all kind of, you know, a similar looking. But I think, honestly, the more I look at it, that's sort of the idea he was trying to get at it. This isn't a movie about individuals, it's about an event. The more sort of, I don't know, the more unified we see this body of humans, the more we are forced to look at the actual circumstances that these people find themselves in, rather than single out individuals. So I did like it. It's a beautiful movie. There's no movie of his I'm like, this movie sucks, you know? Even Insomnia, which most people really don't like, is still high on my list.
We like it,
you know, I think we all really enjoyed it. And that's his most direct, like standard, I guess, if you will.
I think the next one is the one that has the most swing, and whether people like it or not, but
I can't wait till that. But anyway, to answer your question, I do like this movie. It's just not one of my favorite Nolan movies. It would not be one that I would put on again anytime soon, despite it's probably being his shortest movie, maybe since Following. So.
You know, I don't know if I can't remember if we talked about it, but I remember hearing that the Interstellar score, like that incredible like organ music that played every time the like spaceships were taking off, maybe inspired by like a countdown or something like that. The beats were 1 second apart, like exactly. Do you remember hearing anything about that?
About that.
Well, this movie literally has like a clock ticking as the background.
It's Christopher
sound.
Is that what it
Nolan's
is?
like vintage. It's his pocket watch that he carries because he's a fucking old timey weirdo. He carries around a pocket watch, and that's what Hans Zimmer used for that tick 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 tick.
Is that what that is? I was wondering. Maybe that's something that was kind of bothering me, because there's a regularity of a clock that's ticking. That makes a lot of sense now that you say that. Damn it. That's kind of cool.
That'd be funny if, to raise tension, they just had like the iPhone alarm go off every once in a while. You're just like, I hate that.
I gotta say that I disagree with your take on the sound and the score. I think that it's definitely like got some big choices and some big swings, and it is kind of, you know, atonal sometimes and weird, and the weird like clock ticking that you say, like that is so deliberate to drive up tension that it's kind of on the nose and louder than anything ever in any movie, like all of those sounds. But it almost takes the place of his exposition. Like, it's the sound in this movie. It is like the number one character in this movie, to use one of those stupid tropes, is just like, even it carries through all three temporalities of the storylines. Like it doesn't ever change when it's shifting into a new one. It still like maintains the same, even though they're on different timelines and they're on different things, it's like they're all happening at once in this fucking weird score with the same clicking going through Tom Hardy's storyline and Kenneth Branagh's. It's like, it's an interesting choice to me, and it really worked for me this time I was watching it, thinking like, imagine this movie without that score. What the hell would be happening? Like, we'd be like lost in a sea,
I don't know. I can appreciate that. I think it's just that due to everything in this movie feels very period specific, and it felt like the sound didn't match the period. It kind of, in a way, is Nolan getting experimental, and that's great. But I would have liked maybe more sound and audio that was more conducive to the era, because it feels almost to me like a bad Baz Luhrmann movie. No offense, Travis, when you take like an anachronistic soundtrack and put it into a movie that's very period specific.
I don't think it was that anachronistic. It was definitely not like Battle of Algiers, but it was like,
I think because most of his movies are not period films. The last one was way back when. What was it? The Prestige, and that was a while ago now. So most of his movies, I think, we're used to like a modern film that's like, or even slightly futuristic in the case of like Interstellar or Inception, right? So we can like give that. Oh, okay, cool. This is a new sound, different like vibrance to it. But this one, I think I might have preferred less of that sound.
I literally noted that, and that was part of what I liked about the score. It made it more unique to just, I mean? It was, to me, it was a more interesting choice to not reference the era at all. You know what I mean? And I guess you could think about what that says. Is it about, this war could be, any war or something? I don't know. But I liked the soundtrack too. I liked how intense it was. I thought it added to the experience, but it is upsetting. It's not pleasant. I wouldn't like throw on the score to like
at a party,
study to, or at a party. Yeah. Everybody get down.
Literally.
Everybody's looking at me on the stereo, like all those guys looking up at the bomber coming. They're like, no,
right?
Don't let him have the ox.
Oh my god.
So there's a lot of different actors in this movie, though, right? I mean, did anything, I don't know, stand out for you guys in terms of
Nope, they were all
the same
Gollum,
person?
The guy from Gollum. They were all played by him.
All Andy Serkis?
Yeah.
Yeah,
in a different costume.
Speaking of Nolan being an old-timey guy, like you were saying, Ian, who carries a pocket watch, that man appreciates, Savile Row tailoring and stuff like that with all the Batman movies. Everybody was looking fly in those movies. In this one, he gets those period knits of the kind of this coastal Brits, and oh boy, is it like a pleasure to see each new sweater. The reveal of every new sweater in this movie.
Even Kenneth Branagh's uniform, I was looking at being like, dude, he wears a fucking uniform well, and it's Nolan's thing. It's like the costume designer that did that. It's not Branagh being a sexy
Tom
guy.
Hardy at the very end is like, oh, I got to take my jacket off for the final sweater reveal of the white cowl neck, and it's like, oh, a delight.
Although
joy.
I totally noted that too.
No.
All the soggy wools, like
totally. And I was reading something about how, because what do you do when you have all of these characters? They need to look really war worn. You don't have like 100,000 different like actual military coats that have been worn and like worn out, because they look dirty. They look ragged, And so I was reading about how the whole process, they have to like take these things, they like soak them in water, they scrub the living shit out of them, and then they like blow dry them and like scorch them in the sun or something. Like just that process alone must have been pretty time consuming, but it works. That they look like they've been through it, because his camera lens is that clear, where you really have to be present to so much detail and to be faithful to the representing of it.
That's true. Yeah, I mean, with that huge IMAX screen, and if we could just go back to that huge IMAX screen, because I really want to talk about the opening shot of this movie. So my wife got her master's degree in film studies, and her like thesis paper was in the 1950s, when TV was becoming kind of prevalent. Also travel was becoming like a bigger thing in like the post-war world. So you had these two kind of competing things with like going on at the same time, and movies themselves were trying to find a new niche. It wasn't the only place you could go to see like actors telling a story, right? So what happened really quickly was like screens got bigger and screens got wider, and people would go to these theaters, and there were even like different kinds of screens, like, you know, you hear all about like cinemascope and all these different ways of watching movies where the screen would actually curve around the
Mhm.
audience, and they would have multiple projectors. So film wasn't just functioning as like, oh, I'm watching a story that's separate from me. It was really about being like enveloped by the screen in a way that, you know, it might have been part of the experience before, but now people were, that's what they were talking about, that's what they were advertising. And so it was like film acting like uh not like a theater
Yeah.
stage, but like a time machine and
Mhm.
like a portal where you were part of this other environment. So it was actually like directly um competing with like going to like it, like see Italy or something like that. It's like, no, you don't have to go to Italy. You can just see it this way.
Right.
And you know, I don't know exactly how old Christopher Nolan is, but like, you know, he talks a lot about, you know, seeing Star Wars, for example, and
Mhm.
being like, that's the kind of movie where you're just like completely immersed in the experience of watching the movie when you see it in a theater. And that's like what he's going for. And I feel like the opening shot of this movie is like it's so perfect because the camera like goes down and you see like kind of these fluttering papers and they're falling like from above, and when you're in
Yeah.
IMAX you're like looking up to see where they're coming from.
Totally.
And the way he frames the shot, the bottom of the screen is like the street. The sides of the screen are the buildings going up, and you're just, and the soldiers walking towards you. You're just in that corridor with them, like perfectly. And the camera's like, you know, moving like ever so slightly, but it's just, it really feels like you're in that space, moving at like a human speed. And I really love that shot because it's so, like, it's such a modest thing that he's doing in a way, but it's so carefully done to create that experience of being immersed in another time and another space. And it's such a great opening shot.
And to that point, to add
Yeah.
on, even before that, just a few moments, it says CinemaScope, right? And it starts off in a
Right.
almost square widescreen black and white presentation, and it pulls open like a cinema curtains are opening to reveal a
Yeah,
wider
yeah,
screen.
yeah.
Then it turns into color, right? Like we're being, you know, to your point, further transported into the world of the movie, yet hearkening to the period it's referencing, right? So
I really
Yeah.
appreciate all that you just said, and it does take me to what I was going to talk about that close-up shot of the plane that sort of lingers later on, you know, like at the almost at the end of the movie when it's sort of lingering, and it almost looks like a toy plane, like because it's so,
Yes.
you know, just there at the center of the fucking giant screen with like France behind it. It made me realize as I was watching this movie, and actually even just thinking about this movie leading before I watched it, one of the things that Christopher Nolan doesn't do, and I've kind of mistakenly been comparing him to Spielberg and like George Lucas, like you said, who also like originally made these sort of conceptual populist movies like he does.
Hmm.
Um, But one thing that they are masters at that he almost has no interest in is like creating. Well, when you watch their movies, you feel like I need to play that. Like I need to do that after I see this movie. Like you watch Indiana Jones, anybody who watched Indiana Jones when they were a kid is like, oh, maybe if I get a whip, like a fucking jump rope, I can have a whip. You know what I mean? Like that's what you do when you get out of that movie. None of like even despite making 3 Batman movies, you don't get out of those movies being like, maybe I'll be the Dark Knight. Like it doesn't leave you with that kind of thing, you know? And this is the first time that I watched one of his movies where I was like, I could imagine like grabbing a plane and like feeling like doing like grabbing a toy plane and feeling like doing that, you know, soaring over a thing and imagining France behind it. Like it feels like play in a weird way. The whole movie does. Like there's a lot of, even it's as dark as it is and as tense as it is, it does leave you with that sort of like Spielbergian thing of just like, oh, I want to do this after I get out in a weird way. Like I want to make this. Like that's the feeling that I don't think that he usually even is going for, or like that's not his vibe. But in this one, it does feel like that to me. And it was really interesting to me to see like it does sort of play into that thing that you were talking about too, of like that immersiveness of the, you know, entering the world thing that this movie captures of those like old war movies and just all those old movies, and how like it did make me feel like I was part of it, and like I could imagine like wanting to be Tom Hardy like, if I saw this when I was 14. You know what I mean?
Yeah. Well, I think.
I want to.
No, go ahead, Travis.
I was gonna say I want to be the main character guy whose name I don't know, and I don't know anything
Right?
about his personality.
I know.
Well,
I love that guy.
Fionn Whitehead, yeah. You know what? And maybe to that point, if you think about the end of this movie and what it leaves you with, it's actually one of the only like really uplifting Christopher Nolan movie endings. They're almost always end on like kind of a sad, kind of like, oh no, kind of a note, right? Like think about it, Memento, or even The Dark Knight. Batman's getting chased out. The Prestige, you know, dude, dead bodies in a bunch of different tanks and stuff. Interstellar is kind of somber, you know, all of these morose sort of endings. This one has like the illusion of we lost the war, whatever, but this is a great turning point. This is an uplifting moment for all of England and blah 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 blah, right? And so this actually is one of the few Christopher Nolan movies that actually ends on an objectively kind of upbeat, if you will, sort of a note. So maybe there's like that Spielbergian element to it that it leaves you with, you know.
Yeah, you're right.
Also,
I guess-
talking about where this. Oh, you
Yeah,
go.
go
You
ahead.
were responding direct. No, you're responding directly to
Well, I
Chris.
was
so
just
you
gonna
go.
say, I guess Inception is like almost an upbeat note, but it does leave you with that like who knows kind of thing.
Right.
But yeah, that's all I
Uh-huh.
was gonna say.
Right.
Well, I was just gonna say, we've talked a little bit about this movie being kind of like a right turn for Nolan, like a kind of a break for him in that he's like kind of doing things in a slightly different way, or he's abandoning certain elements of his filmmaking for just to focus on other specific elements that are kind of integral to all his films. And I remember when The Dark Knight Rises came out, and he was talking about. He made a big deal about how it's almost like he's making a war movie because there's these like giant crowds of people fighting each other, and he's like, this is probably, and he would say it like very like as if it was like just a simple fact, like this is probably like the biggest, grandest filmmaking since like Intolerance or something like it from the silent movie era, and he called back to silent filmmaking, like the original like 10 Commandments and stuff like that, where they would just like hire armies of people that they were probably paying like meager the most meager payments to, and so he's like, yeah, we're bringing that back. And Dark Knight Rises, I mean, it does have a huge scale, I mean, that's almost what the movie is like about, and you do feel like for this one, I mean, it's not just that people aren't talking. Literally certain sequences of this movie feel like a silent movie. Like even if people are talking, you could turn the sound off and just kind of enjoy the spectacle of it. And I was thinking specifically of when they're moving the guy in the stretcher. I felt like that specifically
really
felt like a silent movie, and they were like, oh no, it was like the perils of Pauline,
Yeah,
and
totally.
when they kept like not getting onto the boat. And I loved that about it. I like
did
that
too,
he's
yeah.
kind of operating in that mode, and he's kind of saying like, I don't need. I mean, I like a movie with lore. I like a movie. I like the more like mystical movies of Christopher Nolan's, and that's why I think again in a movie that's so cold and so real, when the timelines all intersect at the end, and you realize that you're watching something that's not real, and then you're experiencing it in a different way, and that plane runs out of gas, and you're just watching it gliding, and it kind of turns into this surreal thing. I feel like that captures a little bit of like the Nolan experience, and I think that's a good place to examine if you want to talk about like why his movies are so interesting and why they're not boring. Yeah, I think that's a good place to look. But the movie on its own terms is really good and is really well made.
I
And
do want to talk about.
I mentioned. I was just
Wait,
gonna say.
okay,
I
go.
mentioned I mentioned the clunkiness that people kind of criticize his action sequences for. This is like a perfect example of that used like beautifully. I mean, the camera moves so slowly. It moves like with the weight of like a tilting ship, or it moves like with the weight of like a human trudging on a cold sand in like damp wool. You know what I mean? And it's that clunkiness that gives it its gravity and that power that it has.
Yeah.
And other people that swirl the camera around, like Michael Bay, there's a kind of a weightlessness there that doesn't have the same impact.
Well, those
Well, he does this
IMAX cameras are
brilliant thing
hundreds
right
of
at the
pounds
beginning.
too. Oh,
He
sorry.
does this really brilliant thing right at the beginning where, like, that opening action scene when our lead, who we don't know his name, is running with a group of people, and each one of them gets picked off really in rapid succession, and it's like a very intense action moment, like it's a well shot action moment. It gives you this sort of like feeling that you're in this action movie, that even when he does sort of slow it down and have these long stretches where there's not action, like the tension's never not there, because you have this sort of like, I mean, he fucking laid it on thick at the beginning. Like that whole first section is so much just like, get to the fucking boat, everybody's dying around you, and like I thought that was really well done. Like,
but even when things are happening, like the camera is moving so slowly, the takes are long, like it's there's not a lot of like crazy editing. The cross-cutting does build in incredible tension, but again, the takes, each individual shot like lasts like kind of a longish time for this type of movie, and the camera setups are so deliberate. Like every camera angle is so beautiful and so deliberately chosen.
He also, there's so much underwater tension, and it reminded me of Insomnia, because there's the great moment in Insomnia when he gets sort of buried underneath the logs underwater, and he's like, that tension in that moment is so intense. And then in this one, it's fucking ratcheted up 1,000%, where it's like, whether it's the pilot that's trying to get out of the cockpit, and it's like, that seems interminably long. Like, it's crazy how long he's underwater. And you're just like, and then there's also the soldiers that are dealing with that for obviously a long time too, in the sinking schooner or whatever it is. I don't know any war boats.
It was all schooners. You're right.
Well, that I mean, those IMAX cameras are expensive, and he had one right in that plane, right? And that plane actually sank with the camera on it. So they had to go down, and this thing's messing up an incredibly expensive camera. This film reel is now totally wet. And so, as a little weird trivia point, they had to actually use an old school technique where they actually got the camera film out of it and kept it wet, so that they could take it and actually like duplicate it so it wouldn't dry the film out. They like actually like maintained it by keeping it, like preserving its wetness, which is kind of weird. But speaking of the cameras though too, like Travis, I think part of the weight of it too is literally the weight of those cameras, because they're, as I understand it, those IMAX cameras are like hundreds of pounds. And this the film director for cinematography here, I don't think he ever worked with cameras quite that clunky. So this was a real challenge for that guy too. But Jesus Christ, what a result, right? Because it's, just adds to that immersiveness, especially when they're mounted on these beautiful actually flying planes through the sky. I mean, you're right there with the actors.
Well, that's a great point. The way that, and that's always been kind of a fascination of mine related to movies, and also just like popular imagery. I don't know how you even talk about this, but like popular design, but like the way that technology influences aesthetics is really interesting to me. And I think you're totally right. What I'm kind of getting at is that about the deliberate camera placement and stuff, and the slow kind of movement of it. It really is. I mean, I think he kind of works that way anyways, but it feels like such a natural fit when he's using the bulky IMAX camera that's actually like determining how what the shots are going to be. And if you're working with a small camera and you can do more setups, then you're going to do quicker shots, and you're going to do, if you're working with drones, you know what I mean, you're going to like be zooming it all around. It's a totally different feel.
Especially with a movie like, say, Saving Private Ryan that came out almost 10 years earlier, right, where it's almost all, it felt like it's shot on an iPhone. It's just like the jitteriness, it's right there. So that provides a completely different experience, still immersive in its own right, but absolutely a different way of viewing a movie. That's this very lightweight, very in-your-face camera that's just shaking and moving almost as though it's a person itself,
Yeah, that was the first iPhone movie.
People think it was Tangerine, but
no.
Let's talk about especially Mark Rylance, right? We got to talk about some of the performances in this movie.
Dude, I love Mark Rylance. He should have been nominated for Don't Look Up. That is like one of my favorite performances of
Did
like
you
the last
guys ever
5 years.
see-
I still haven't
What
seen
was
Bridge
the
of
name of
Spies.
that-
I still want to see that one though.
Okay, so that's the one that sort of
I think he won the Academy
cemented
Award
him.
for that one, right?
Yeah, as for supporting actor, yeah. And that's the movie that sort of cemented him into his new fame as this sort of like, I don't know, has there ever been an actor that aged into himself better than Mark Rylance? Like, he seems like he's always been there, but if you guys have ever seen like his earlier work, he's a completely different actor. Like, he doesn't do, what was the fucking movie? I can't think of the name of it. Oh, Intimacy. Did you guys ever see Intimacy?
No.
No, I don't think so.
Is that an older
He
one?
fucking hangs hog in it. He lets his dick hang out.
Okay.
He shows full frontal, and he's like,
People listen to our podcast to find out where to see Mark Rylance
well, now
naked.
you know. And it came out in, 99 or 2000 or something like that. And it's like, you watch that movie, and the idea that this is the guy that's going to grow up to become, and I mean, it's obviously, 40 when that movie came out or whatever, but that he's going to be who we all think of as like the sort of noble British man that can nod at you the way that he nods at his son in this movie. I mean, that's a moment that it really worked emotionally for me, and it's all in the performances when his son tells Cillian Murphy that it's Cillian, right? Not Cillian?
Killian, yeah.
Cillian.
I believe so.
I hate saying Cillian because it sounds like I'm putting a hit out on myself, but sorry. Anyway, when he tells Cillian Murphy that George is going to be okay, and then like the penetrating gaze of Mark Rylance as he's like watching his son do the noble lie, right? That thing that we talk about Nolan all the time.
Right.
And
You got to do it.
he's looking at him, and he's just like, yes, you understand. He gives him like this like quiet nod that's like very subtle, and it's like that fucking moment is a performance like of all time. Like, it really works.
Well, getting Mark Rylance and Barry
Keoghan.
What's his name? Keoghan.
Keoghan.
There's too much intensity in one boat. Like you're gonna need a bigger boat. That's like
We're gonna need a bigger boat.
We need a kid and like an old guy, and it's like those two on the same space. It's just like, dude, shit's gonna go down on this boat. Like, you know what I mean? And it's like, Mark Rylance is so subtle in the movie.
Mm-hmm.
You know what I mean? His performance, what he's able to kind of wring out of those simple moments is extraordinary. And Barry is just like just so much eccentric like weirdness, like just all his like little ticks and little like his like swagger and stuff like that. He is also like insane to watch. Like,
yeah,
I don't
he's
know.
an
They're
incredible
both incredible.
new
They both have so much, like in a movie where people don't talk that much, people don't do that much. They do so much with so little in this movie. Like,
but you do need
incredible
Georgie
casting
to have that much energy and that much magnetism,
Yes.
like to look at, because it is heartbreaking when he falls down and his head is fucking broken and he says
I
he's
thought
blind.
Nolan kind of played it for laughs. Like, I thought it was kind of funny.
When he falls.
No, I'm just no.
Jesus Christ! You fucking got me. You should be an actor.
No, I'm just saying like no. Christopher Nolan is great at casting, and he's great at directing actors, and he doesn't get the credit he deserves. And there's two performances, and the performance of the kid, who I don't know if I've ever seen him in anything else.
Peter, you mean?
But
the
the
other
son,
Yeah.
like he's like perfectly cast too. He doesn't have as much to do, but like, just perfect at like being like
Yeah, especially when he's debating whether to lock Cillian Murphy into the
Yeah,
room,
that's a great moment.
That's
yeah.
a moment where it's just like you feel it.
You should have
feel like
fucking done it.
Right.
You're
You
like,
should have done it.
do I do this? I know I shouldn't, but I kind of know that I should. It's like real
Yeah.
fear, but also, I don't know. That was a great moment too.
Absolutely.
And then, yeah, who else? I mean, that's pretty much all I had to say about the performances in this movie, except for that Kenneth Branagh does a lot of look acting in this movie. Like, he's just always staring out over.
It's very Spielbergian, right? Where you're like, zoom in on the reaction and not the thing that they're looking at,
You feel like you feel like he was just came in for a day to shoot all those scenes, or like he's the one guy that was allowed to be on a green screen, because he does not seem like he's in the action at all. He's just at the end of the dock looking out, like he has just a little
looking
too much. He has like a little too much glimmer of something in his eye. You know what I mean? Like everybody else is kind of like, this sucks. He's just like, it'll be fine. He almost gives you too much. Like confidence that things will work out. He's not my favorite performance in the movie, even though he does have, of course, incredible, presence and stuff like that, just standing there. So.
Although
I did like the one line though, sorry, Chris, when he says, "That's why you're Army and I'm Navy." Oh, thank God I'm your Army and I'm Navy or whatever, because it is like one of the only conversations in the movie, like besides when they're debating inside the ship whether the French guy is a spy or whatever, all that stuff, but like most of the movie doesn't have conversation in it, and that is for dialogue, I guess, and that's like one moment that he chooses to put in there that like just feels real and weird, and I'm like, he liked that line and he put it in the movie, and it worked. I don't know, I liked it.
Well, one thing I noticed this time, and I can't believe I didn't notice this the first time I saw this movie, this is the second time I saw it, by the way, was, speaking of conversations, Tom Hardy is talking to the leader, whatever, Royal Navy leader. And I'm like, wait, what? It is Michael Caine. Like, he had to be in this movie, of course. So I never picked up on that before. It's clearly Michael Caine's voice talking to Tom Hardy that, again, I never noticed. But, speaking of recurring regulars, it's also, the third time Cillian Murphy and Tom Hardy are in a Christopher Nolan movie together. It's like the seventh movie Michael Caine's in. Like,
that is another person that we should talk about his performance, not Michael Caine, because that's just a funny thing.
I did not know that was Michael Caine. That's cool.
Cillian Murphy's performance is great. I mean, he's just a great actor. Like, he's got such presence also, like another fucking presence on that boat that you're talking about, right. The Moonstone just carries the weight of so much fucking electricity, because he's got another guy that's like impossibly pretty to look at, like Tom Hardy, but in a different way. Like he's kind of like hideously pretty. I don't know how to describe it, but he's like freaky in that he just doesn't look worldly. And to put him in this shell-shocked sort of shivering sailor, I think is what they call him. Like he's credited as like shivering sailor or something like that. And it's
my timbers, sir, they've been shivered.
But he does like carry that sort of, I felt like I completely appreciated why he was acting the way he was, not just from a shell-shocked point of view, but just like, no, like, don't fucking go back there. Like, you feel that. You're like, no, you cannot. Like, it's not a cruel thing when he's, like, trying to wrestle the steering wheel from Mark Rylance. Like, it's like, no, like, how could you possibly pick me up and bring me back to Dunkirk? Like, I don't know. It really was amazing.
Totally. Reasonable. Yeah. I mean, war is, like, insane. And, you know what I mean? Like, and before I do want to like talk about like the politics of the movie, because there is something going on there that we should like broach. But I also want to talk about like at the beginning of the movie, you did get the feel of the scope and the scale of everything, and you did feel like there were like hundreds of thousands of people or whatever on the beach. But then that kind of goes away, and you kind of are like, did they run out of like money for like extras on the beach? And did Nolan just be like, I'm not putting CG guys on the beach. I'm not doing it, because like it really feels like, even in a movie like that doesn't feel as big. What's that movie, Atonement? Like there's more people on that beach for most of the movie than there is in that one shot than there are in this one. Don't see it; it's bad. But
yeah,
you're not an Atonement fan either,
no,
Chris?
not even from the opening shot. No,
the worst.
Thank you.
I hate that movie. But anyway, yeah. So I thought that was odd that they kind of like, they could have. It's cool when they kind of like break away from the crowd and they kind of like, let's just focus on these characters in this struggle. But then there were times where I felt like they should have kind of rejoined the crowds, and it never happened. And by the end, I was like, is anybody left on the beach?
Like 300,000
he doesn't check back he doesn't check back like and make you go like, oh wow, remind you of that scale.
Yeah, yeah,
I don't
you're
know. It's weird. It's something's could have been different there. I don't know. Doesn't work fully.
Yeah, I
Okay.
agree.
It is pretty cool,
So,
though, at the
politics.
end, though, when you talk about scale, when all of those ships kind of come over the horizon, there's like over 50
That's what I'm
different
saying.
boats.
And who are they picking up? There's only like 10 guys.
I think that's his way of like, oh, remember, we need all these boats because there's all these people you probably haven't seen since the beginning of the movie, you know?
Yeah.
Mhm.
Yeah. I did like when the boats arrived. That was cool. Like you weren't seeing any of them, and then all of a sudden they're all there
Right.
charting their different courses. Okay, so the politics of this movie are: if a soldier has a hard time, they're allowed to kill one human boy, and with no repercussions. That's the policy Nolan is suggesting with this film.
I mean, I totally agree that he is saying that too. I don't think that that's like the biggest issue with the politics in this movie, but yeah, that is a part of it too. It's just like sometimes you gotta break it. You gotta break a few eggs to make an omelet.
He had a hard time. Not only should he be allowed to kill him, he shouldn't have to even face the fact that he did kill him. Like you know what I mean? If he had a hard enough time, he shouldn't even have to worry about it. Like worry about anything.
And it is that thing that like I just said, like it works completely emotionally when you watch it because of the performances. But even the first time I watched it, I was like, no, like
that
you know?
that left an extremely bad taste in my mouth
Yeah.
the first time, and even more so this
Yeah.
time because I knew it was like leading up to it. I was like,
Mhm.
he's just a weird kid. Like, why are they killing this kid? You know?
mean,
If it was the guy's son, it would have had more weight to it. It just felt like this kid was disposable.
Yeah.
And I felt like that choice was made because he's a weirdo, because he's not the guy's son, that those choices were made to make it work within the story, and that's what I felt was like wrong. You know what I mean? I was like, do not kill Georgie, kill the kid with the red sweater, kill the blonde kid, and then see how we feel about it,
Good call. I mean, to me, the biggest issue, and I started to talk about this when you went to go get your headphones, but was that this movie came out in 2017, right? So we're all
Yes.
living in this, like, in America, we're dealing with, like, extreme Trump anxiety. And then in Britain, they're dealing with, like, Brexit tearing the fucking country apart and, like, all this shit. And I felt like watching it the first time, it didn't bother me as much this time just because I had put more weight on it in my memory of how like intense that was. How intense the feeling of like the bad feeling it left in my mouth was, but it just like I couldn't get past the fact that like in that moment in time, he was choosing to make a movie where the moral is like, no, like get behind the country, do what you gotta do. We're gonna like, like country first. You know what I mean? Like that stiff upper lip
But-
country first thing. That was like. But no, like this is a time for dissent. Like we should be like, no, we should be silly Cillian Murphy being like, no, get the fuck out of here. I'm not going back to the war for you, pigs.
Well, it's interesting because no one, Republican or Democrat in America at least, was championing basically any war at that time. Like, you know what I mean? Both the Republicans and the Democrats were like, stop, like, get out of the war. You know what I mean? Like, what we were looking at there, and I don't know how strongly you guys felt it, but I think a lot of people in 2017 were, like you said, kind of Trump anxiety, dealing with the fallout of supporting the like candidate who was like the easy answer against Trump, like the first female president, like just trust, like Hillary Clinton's loss against Trump was like the final, like, I have no faith in American institutions anymore. You know what I mean? And with Brexit, whether you voted for Brexit or against Brexit, no politician, is my understanding, has like a plan to do Brexit, right? Like, and that's been their kind of like Mr. Bean-esque, like run of prime ministers, and ever since has been just like a failure to deal with like the country's direction and like the popular sentiments and stuff and again, so that's like Britain's like kind of like failure of any institution, like right or left. And I feel like this isn't so much saying like, no, like the institutions are fine, as it is saying like, remember when we had institutions, you know?
I
I
guess
think
that's a better way of putting it, but that's also gross to me. Like in that
it
moment, like because it's also like in that moment I was feeling because I think you said it more accurately. It is like it felt make America great again to me in a weird way
yeah, no, yeah,
of
that's
like
fair. That's totally
let's
fair.
let's remember what we used to be like in World War II when we were like that kind of thing.
Yeah,
And I was just like,
yeah.
no, not now. Like now we should be like, how can we make this country better? Like for real better, you know? And it felt gross to me. And this time it didn't as much, not because it wasn't there, but just because like when it originally came out, I got in arguments with it with people where I was just like, no, it's a great movie, but like, are you not grossed out by the fact that it's like a make England great again movie? You know, I was like, I felt like that, and people were like, yeah, but and it just made me mad, you know. And this time that wasn't there because it also like it's subtext in a weird way, you know. It's like it's
Hmm.
also mostly about just like all of his movies. They're political, but they're not committed enough to their political ideology the way that like a Coen Brothers or a um, Cuarón movie is, where you like feel the politics like heavy usually. So they aren't enough to like ruin the movie usually, but it kind of did ruin this movie for me when I saw it in the theater.
Yeah.
It's the only one of his movies that really like weighed on me because we've talked about how he's this conservative director, and we don't really you know, this is the only one that like it really felt like a bridge too far in a weird way when I was watching it the first time.
Hmm.
I kind of felt the same way, and again, I want to be really clear when when I say I think of Nolan as a conservative director, that means like again like let's make the let's convince all the cops to be good. Let's make them all
Mm-hmm.
be heroic, like in Dark Knight Rises, right? Where it's
Mm-hmm.
like let's look at how pretty these uniforms are when you get everybody together. Like that is like Nolan conservatism. I don't think he's like a Trump supporter. I really
I
like that
agree
is
with you.
not
I mean,
like it's a conservatism like that. It's like Joe Biden is
yeah,
like a conservative in the same way where he's just like my dad used to be like
yes,
this and we had this great army and stuff like that. Like this is just a general kind of conservatism that is again, I agree with you, is not maybe super helpful to be like look at World War II and remember it's like remember the one good war, remember
mm-hmm.
the one war that was like kind of justified. Like that's not really helpful for right
Right.
now. And I want to go to some stuff that Mark Rylance says in the movie because it kind of like he says a lot of like kind of like cliched kind of propaganda stuff. One is like we won't have a home if we try, if we turn back now. And it's like again, that was true like one time. You know what I mean? Like you there's a reason why World War II is the war
The
that
movie war,
movies like
yeah,
the movie war. Yeah,
yeah,
exactly. Because it's like there were bad guys and there were good guys and like
uh-huh.
war doesn't usually operate like that. And to Nolan's credit, let's say this movie does not make war look fun. It does not make war look
No.
the people that are gonna fight in the war and maybe even win the war, like the guy says, they're not ever going to be the same again. You know what I
Mhm.
mean? Like we're paying with our children's blood, and souls for
Mhm.
this victory. And so that's I guess that's something.
Yeah.
But the other part that really rubbed me the wrong way is his son was a pilot who died. It's revealed later on in the film. And when he hears the airplane motors, he has this kind of like, oh, I know exactly what airplane that is, but without even looking, right? The kid points out, and he's like, that's the best noise you could possibly hear right now. And I remember seeing like when I was in college, like there was they would show there was like a clip in some documentary about how the American news loves to like do stories on like new war machinery, right? And it's like they'll talk about it in this way where it's like, look how powerful this machinery is, and like and it's just like it's like it's like a new product or something. It's like look how
Mhm.
powerful this dishwasher is, and what they're talking about is machinery that's like designed to like destroy human bodies, and so it's like
Yeah, we all ate fruit snacks that were shaped like bombers, like it was
no, I had mine were sharks if I remember correctly.
yeah.
But the point is, like, just because World War II was a war where
Yeah.
there were good guys and there were bad guys, does not mean, like, as Nolan would be the first to admit, right? Like, if just because something can be used for good, it can also
Right.
be used for evil. And
But that's
like
why
I felt like this
watching
movie,
it.
yeah, was very kind of like, war propaganda
Yeah.
for World War II, and it's like, what's the point, really? You
And
know what I mean? Like,
especially in a time when the country was so divided and so like, and both countries that he sort of serves,
mhm.
were so divided. It was like, so you're choosing this right now. Like that was what I felt like was kind of gross. But also now, years removed, I can watch it and it's like, no, it's a beautifully conservative World War II movie, like, and that's all I can really say about that.
Yeah.
Let's talk about Harry Styles. Just kidding.
I don't even know who Harry Styles is, to be honest. I saw him in another movie, but I didn't know who he was or why this was a important thing until I had to look it up. So I guess I've been out of the
Oh, really?
musical loop for far too
Yeah,
long.
he's a big deal.
He was okay. I mean, he was another soldier. That was okay.
Yeah, he's just kind of faceless in this movie,
Yeah.
even though he's got a face.
Yeah. Is that his real name?
It sounds a lot like Hairstyles, doesn't it?
Hairstyles. Yeah.
Anyway, should we rate him? What do you guys think? I have this other thing, but I think I'm going to save it for my final thoughts on Christopher Nolan because I
Don't
really
hold
did
back.
like...
What if you die? What if you get
if-
pushed down in the hull of a boat and hit your head?
I could. I mean, should I talk about it? Because it's sort of what we were already talking about when I was saying that I've mistakenly compared him too much to Steven Spielberg and like that kind of director in my mind. Because what I realized this week, and I sort of realized it before I even started this movie, was while I've tried to like nail down the progression of what makes each of our filmmakers who they are, like it's kind of a clear shot from most directors. You can kind of trace their lineage of like who influenced them, and I've had a hard time sort of placing him on the timeline of filmographers of like where he stands, because he is very original. He is very like an auteur of his time. And then I realized that like comparing him to the big blockbuster filmmakers like Spielberg and Lucas doesn't really work. And I think that like what I realized is that he's sort of our like modern day D.W. Griffith and Cecil B. DeMille and David Lean and Ridley Scott. Like these guys are his guys.
What do you mean?
He makes these giant scope, high concept movies where it's all about the scope of the movie, and it is a concept and it is for popular consumption. He's not making indie films. Like this is maybe his most indie film.
I see.
Like in a weird way.
Okay.
It's not, but I just mean like in the choices that it makes.
I
But
see.
he's making movies that he wants the entire world to love in the same way that those guys do.
I see. Okay.
And they are successful. They aren't, play movies the way that like Spielberg makes these populist movies, but they are for like the kid in you. This is for like the adult in you, in a weird way. Like they're calling, all of his movies are sort of calling to the like inner adult that wants to come out.
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
That's a really good point. It's like, yeah, no, that's totally true. Like you're like playing with Batman toys, and then by the end of the movie, you're like, I want to put on a tweed blazer
suit,
and go be Bruce Wayne. Really.
Yeah. And I don't know.
That's so
It
funny.
kind of made him make more sense to me. And in the same way that like I love David Lean movies, I have incredible not all of them. Okay, sorry. But I have incredible respect for like Cecil B. DeMille. Not a big fan of D.W. Griffith, but obviously we wouldn't have movies without him, and he's like the most important filmmaker of maybe of all time.
He did Birth of a Nation, right?
Yeah, and Intolerance, like you
Right.
just mentioned, referring to this movie. And like these movies that are just like impossible to not appreciate. I feel the same way about every single Christopher Nolan movie. They're like impossible not to appreciate, and you can put him in that line, like that fucking timeline of filmmakers, like in the same way that you would put Coen Brothers after like Looney Tunes and Preston Sturges, and like you can like trace their descendants. Like you can do that with him now. I can do that with him now.
Yeah.
And it's interesting to me that like this project works. Auteur Detour works. Like I didn't get him before. And now I
We
get
are
him.
validated. No, it's totally true. It's the same. Yeah, it's the same when you go to like an art exhibition and you see like all the paintings by like one person. You're like, oh, I get it. I get what they're doing. Like,
Right.
that context is really important. And watching these films like this, I agree, it works.
Especially in,
that's
as you
random.
watch it filmography, over time and see how someone moves over the span of like a decade or more, right? Especially in the Coen Brothers
Yeah.
and 18 different movies through even,
Yeah.
Alfonso Cuarón has a pretty lengthy career between the first movie and his final one, right? So,
Yeah.
absolutely. We rating him? Ranking
Yeah,
him, I
I'll
mean?
rate it first. I still have the Dark Knight trilogy as a lump sum as my number one, but I'll just break them down as Dark Knight Rises, Batman Begins in that order. Then I go to Interstellar, which I absolutely love and think is a massive achievement. Then comes Memento. I put Inception next, and then I put Dunkirk. Then Prestige, Insomnia following.
Wow. I have a very different order myself. Inception, Inception still holds that number one spot. Then followed by Memento.
Yes, love to see it.
Yep. Dark Knight. Then Prestige, Interstellar are the first five, and then we have Dark Knight Rises. Then Dunkirk at number 7, Insomnia, Batman Begins, and following.
Number 1, Dark Knight trilogy. Number 2, Inception. 3, Memento. Those 3 still are my I think are like
That's
my
6,
favorite.
but yeah.
And I can't break the Batman ones down. I can't do it. Okay, and then very close behind number 4 is Interstellar. 5, Prestige. 6, Following. And I'm going to put Dunkirk and Insomnia at the bottom as kind of like, I really appreciate them. I enjoy them. But I could totally take them out of Christopher Nolan's kind of thing and never watch them again and not just have... It would be of no concern to me outside of like a few moments or a few shots. You know
Well
what I mean?
said.
They don't really feel like Christopher Nolan movies in the same way for
Absolutely.
me. So,
Absolutely. Nice. Well, we're almost there. This is film 10 out of...
Almost done,
Yeah,
guys.
one more film that we have...
Well, Oppenheimer,
that's
too.
out. Yeah.
Woo! All right, guys. Well,
Good talk.
until the next time, later, film friends.
Bye, film friends.
Goodbye.
Thank you for listening to Auteur Detour. We'll see you again next week.